is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Ukraine accuses Russian forces of continuing firing as civilians trapped in the Azovstal steel plant try to leave along the humanitarian corridor.
Our other headlines, cutting off Russia's funding. Hungary says no to an oil embargo on Moscow as European negotiators meet to try to win over reluctant countries.
Boris Johnson's Conservative Party gets a kicking in local elections, but there might be more political drama ahead in Scotland, Wales and in Northern Ireland.
It's voters here in Belfast and beyond that could be about to elect Sinn Féin as the largest party in what would be a symbolic and potentially seismic shift.
And the owner of British Airways reports an $800 million loss for the first quarter, but says it's confident of gaining altitude. Ukraine says a new attempt is underway to evacuate the last remaining civilians trapped in the Azovstal steelworks in Mariupol. This comes after fighting with Russian forces thwarted efforts to move people to safety on Thursday.
The United Nations and the Red Cross say nearly 500 civilians have left the industrial complex in the past week. At least 200 people, mostly women and children, and up to 2,000 Ukrainian fighters are still sheltering in underground bunkers. Well, let's talk to Associated Press reporter John Gambrell, who's in Lviv. John, people were due to board buses in Mariupol this morning. Do we know what's happened?
The international community, particularly the UN, is being really tight-lipped about this evacuation effort. Ukrainians had said that they were hoping that civilians would gather at a certain point in Mariupol for buses to come to get them, but we're still unclear on what's happening. Now, during this all, we've had a series of attacks that are still targeting this steel mill. This is the last standing point for the Ukrainian fighters in that city. Just in the last couple of hours, the fighters that are there have put out a statement saying that they tried to move a vehicle at the site to aid in the evacuation. They say Russian forces fired on it with an anti-tank missile, destroying the vehicle. They published pictures of this damaged vehicle, and then as well a video that showed a severely wounded fighter after what they described as the attack. They said another fighter was killed. I have to caution that Moscow hasn't acknowledged this. Moscow has been describing this as a cordon operation around this steel mill to try to hold the fighters in there as they prepare for Victory Day on next week on Monday. But we've seen days and days of shelling from the sea, from the air with missiles, as well as on the ground with artillery and rockets mounted on the back of trucks just pounding this facility, raising questions on if it'll ever stop and allow an evacuation of that site to go on.
The last time evacuees were transferred out of Mariupol, the trip took them 5 days until they got to safety. What do you think will happen this time?
It's a good question, and the last evacuation that we saw may point to how this one could go. You have to keep in mind that Mariupol is basically surrounded on all sides by Russian-controlled territory. So those who would leave would be on a bus that would probably be escorted by the United Nations or the International Committee of the Red Cross. And in the last one, we saw those buses go to a so-called filtration site. This is what Ukrainians say happens there, that Russians talk to those on the buses, interview them, and then they get to choose whether or not they want to stay in that location or move on to Ukrainian-held territory. The last time the UN said that there were some Ukrainians who chose to stay at the filtration camp, and the rest were moved onto buses and onward to Zaporizhia in southern Ukraine, which is still held by the Ukrainians. But we're still just trying to wait to see if these people are even going to be able to get out of Mariupol at all.
John, thanks very much. That's John Gambrell from the Associated Press in Lviv.
International efforts to starve Russia of funds to finance their invasion are not straightforward. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban says a proposed EU embargo on Russian oil would amount to an atomic bomb dropped on his economy. The EU wants to see a ban on imports, and negotiators are meeting to try to win over reluctant countries. Several Eastern European governments are concerned they're not being given enough time to adapt. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Rebecca Bunden in Brussels. Rebecca, how are the EU negotiations proceeding?
These negotiations are complex and tough, and that's reflected in the fact that we haven't seen an agreement reached yet, despite the European Commission actually proposing the sanctions earlier this week. And there is a certain amount of disagreement, we understand, with Slovakia and Hungary in particular opposing the oil embargo, which is the main sticking point at the moment in this sixth round of sanctions. Now, it's been reported that these sanctions are now being tweaked. Those proposals are being tweaked to actually try and get these countries on board. It's been suggested that the deadline for Hungary and Slovakia could actually be extended until 2024 to actually stop using Russian oil. But would that be enough? That's the question, because Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban today talked about actually needing 5 years to actually be able to actually become non-dependent on Russian oil supplies, and actually also needing to spend billions of dollars to change its infrastructure, to invest in its infrastructure, to actually be able to wean itself off Russian oil. So that's a big concern. And he talked about the impact on the Hungarian economy of such an oil embargo. Let's listen to that.
Russian or any type of oil can only arrive via pipeline, of which one end is in Russia. The other is in Hungary. This is a condition we have. We cannot accept a proposal that ignores this, because this proposal in its current form equals an atomic bomb thrown into the Hungarian economy.
Rebecca, is there a chance the oil embargo on Russia may not be included in this latest round of EU sanctions?
It's something that's not impossible, given the fact that for these sanctions to actually come into effect, all 27 EU member countries have to be in full agreement. If even one country doesn't agree, then it's not an option. But having said that, when these sanctions were proposed by the European Commission earlier this week, it was very much understood that they were expecting these to go through. A complete U-turn isn't really expected, and they do want these to go through, given the fact that they're very concerned about cutting off these revenues that are going to the Kremlin at the moment and are helping to actually finance the war with Ukraine. So the question is now, like, how long will these negotiations take, as everyone is working on this, trying to hammer out the details, and they're tweaking the sanctions to try to get everyone on board. It's a process that now could go into this weekend. And in comments today that came out from Josep Borrell, who's the EU foreign policy chief, he said if it's not agreed upon this weekend, this will then spill over into next week, and there would be a meeting called of foreign ministers, EU foreign ministers potentially, to work on this. So it could be a longer process now.
Rebecca, thanks for that. Rebecca Bunden, our correspondent in Brussels.
Punishing Russia will inevitably mean pain for many European economies. For the EU to phase out Russian oil completely, all 27 member states need to sign up to the sanctions plan. CGTN correspondent Laura Macon-Isherwood reports from Budapest.
The oil tankers keep coming to the Százhalombatta oil refinery south of Budapest, queuing to collect cargoes produced from Russian crude that the European Union wants to end. Hungary's dependence on Russia for its energy supplies is at the centre of a sanctions debate. Without being able to fill these oil silos with crude arriving via pipelines through Ukraine, the government claims that the economy would collapse. Analysts say Hungary could call for support from other nations.
If there is a full halt of Russian oil exports, what we will need is to utilize the strategic reserve. So every EU country has a 90-day strategic reserve, and this is oil products and oil, and this is one reserve, not national reserve. So France can deliver to Hungary.
The situation is fueling debate. The government says 65% of Hungary's oil currently comes from Russia via already established routes, and a move away from that, ministers claim, will compromise the country's energy security.
Hungary is landlocked, its entire oil infrastructure network designed around the current pipelines that are in place. Industry chiefs say that if there was a forced shift towards collecting supplies from the seas instead, then the system would struggle to cope.
There have also been claims that big technological shifts would be needed to enable Hungary's refineries to process different types of oil, such as that from the US or the Middle East. But with Hungary being home to some of the most advanced refineries in Europe, one former advisor to the government says that objection could be about cash instead.
So it means that they can receive theoretically any kind of oil. Of course, the other question is that the Ural kind of oil price level is much more lower than the Brent level. So it means that they are buying with such kind of discount around $20, $25, $30 per barrels from Russian sellers, but they are pricing these end user products based on the Brent price.
There have already been warnings that consumers' pockets will be hit by a Russian oil embargo. The Prime Minister's Chief of Staff saying petrol and diesel prices could surge by up to 50%. In the town of Paksh, hopes of greater energy independence are being focused on nuclear power. The 4 reactors at this site already produce more than 50% of Hungary's electricity, and work has already begun on expanding the programme. But with the fuel rods needed to power this plant also coming from Russia, the energy links between the two nations could continue well beyond the current EU sanctions battle. Laura Macon-Isherwood, CGTN, Hungary.
One of the UK's biggest convenience store chains, McColl's, has gone into administration, putting 16,000 jobs at risk. Banks have refused to offer any further credit to the chain, which has been struggling with debts of over $200 million. McColl's owns thousands of gas stations and shops across Europe, Australia and the United States.
German sportswear maker Adidas has lowered its expectations for this year after a first-quarter slump. Its operating profits tumbled 38% amid supply chain disruption, store closures and rising costs in the Greater China region, which is the company's second-largest global market. But Adidas expects a return to growth in the second quarter.
Customers shopping for Gucci handbags and other luxury goods will soon be able to pay using cryptocurrencies in some United States stores from later this month. Gucci said it was always looking to embrace new technology and planned to expand the service to its other North American stores.
Cocaine worth an estimated $50 million has been found in bags of coffee beans at a Nestle factory in Switzerland. Police say company staff found a white substance while unloading bags sent from Brazil. Nespresso has issued a statement saying its coffee capsules are safe to consume. An investigation is underway.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, disunited kingdom, why the UK's local elections could have profound consequences for Northern Ireland and Great Britain.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. A quick reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms. On Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Votes are being counted across the UK after local elections. Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has suffered a kicking following illegal lockdown parties at Downing Street. But the opposition Labour Party isn't opening the celebratory champagne just yet. Its successes have been rather modest so far, but it's voters in Northern Ireland who could be about to unleash a political earthquake. Our correspondent Guy Henderson is in Westminster, but first let's take you to Andrew Wilson in Northern Ireland's capital, Belfast. Andrew, any indication yet on how this election has gone?
What they predicted a day ago and 2 days ago and leading up in the research towards the campaigning and to this final election day are still pretty comfortable with their prediction that Sinn Féin will come out as the party on top. Now that means that the counters here have got a lot of work to do, because proportional representation, what they have in Ireland, is not the same. Voters just don't pick their candidate of choice. They list them in order of preference, and so there's quite a lot of recounting that has to happen, and that takes time. Now the balance of power since the Good Friday Agreement 24 years ago has almost always fallen with the Unionist Party, the DUP, as the main party in the Assembly, with the very close second place going to Sinn Féin, the Nationalist Party, which is pro-United Ireland, anti-UK, coming in as a close second. So they've always had a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister from Sinn Féin to follow. Now that lead has sometimes been quite tight. Since 2017, the last election, there was only one seat in it, so Sinn Féin have always been close. But this time round, the DUP have got some problems in terms of their image. They've got problems with the Northern Ireland Protocol. Some of the unionists that vote for them normally feel they haven't been going in hard enough on the situation surrounding the protocol and have defected to more extreme unionist parties. Sinn Féin haven't done much. They've held their ground. They haven't increased their numbers of seats, according to the pollsters, but even with the number of seats they normally get, that would probably qualify them to be the strongest party in the Assembly instalment, which would be an enormous first. It would be a historic first. Nothing like this has ever happened before. A nationalist party having the highest, the strongest showing in an election in Northern Ireland, and it would be historic. Now, would it be seismic? Well, that's a different matter.
Andrew, for those who are not immersed in the minutiae of British elections, just explain to us how significant a win for Sinn Féin would be in Northern Ireland.
Well, there's two things to note on that point, Jamie. First of all, that would mean that as far as the optics are concerned, if Sinn Féin were to come in as the largest party, constitutionally they would then provide the First Minister of Northern Ireland. Now, a Democratic Unionist Party would have a Deputy First Minister. According to the Constitution, the power sharing means that those two individuals and their parties have equal power, but the optics are always there. If you've got a First Minister and a Deputy First Minister, it's natural to look to the former as being somehow the senior member of any alliance. Now, Sinn Féin has a completely different agenda to the Unionists. The Unionists are pro-UK, anti-Europe, and they want things to continue the way they have been for the past 25 years. Sinn Féin are pro-United Ireland, anti-UK, and so their real ideological thrust is towards eventually having what they've always called a border poll, a referendum within the community of Northern Ireland to decide whether or not to join back up with their prosperous neighbour Ireland to the south, which is an EU country, of course. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. There's an awful lot in the Constitution that prevents wild swings of politics like that But nonetheless, that will now be the idea that gets oxygen breathed into it in the debates in Stormont. That will surely follow. The second point that's interesting is that the rise of the moderate parties has really taken off. There's every sign, even in this counting hall, one of 3 here in Northern Ireland, that the Alliance Party, a cross-denominational unionist and nationalist party mixed, a much more moderate affair, is really starting to attract the attention, not only of voters that have been around for a long time, but a new generation, too young to remember even the Good Friday Agreement, that are not looking at this country on sectarian grounds. That could be a new balance of power, making its presence felt in Stormont, not in a significant way this time round, but getting much harder to ignore.
Andrew, we wait for the rest of those results. For the moment, our correspondent Andrew Wilson in Northern Ireland's capital, Belfast.
Well, let's talk to Guy Henderson now, who is in Westminster in London. Guy, the Conservatives losing some key councils, but it does look like Boris Johnson is safe, at least for now.
Yeah, it does. Look, after the Brexit vote here in the UK, the electoral map of England was pretty much turned upside down, and the early results that we're getting across England, not all of them have come in yet, indicate that some of the patterns that emerged from in the wake of that historic vote persist. So, for example, here in London, the Conservative Party have continued to lose support, including losing for the first time to the opposition Labour Party, the borough of Westminster, where I'm standing now. But at the same time, there's some indication that they're likely to hold on to some of the gains that they made in other parts of the country outside of London, in the southwest of England, for example, in parts of the north of England, places that tended to be more heavily in favour of Britain leaving the European Union. But overall, the picture that is being painted at the moment is that the opposition Labour Party, to some extent, and also another opposition party, the Liberal Democrats, have overall made gains against the Conservatives. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson's backers will say, well, this is a local election. It doesn't paint an accurate picture of how people would vote at the national level. It tends to focus on local issues. But I think it's going to be interesting to see whether there are more MPs, party members within Boris Johnson's own party who start to say openly in the wake of this result, well, perhaps this has gone the way it has because of the leadership at the national level, because of Boris Johnson in the wake of him being fined by the police over illegal parties during lockdown. Saying that, since the polls have closed, the police here in England have now confirmed that they're also investigating allegations that the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, is also being investigated over alleged breaches of lockdown as well. That could possibly then blunt the extent to which the opposition party, the main opposition party, can focus their attack so down that particular angle going forward.
OK, Guy Henderson in Westminster, thank you.
The UK has been grappling with illegal emigration for years now. The government's plan to send migrants to Rwanda has been delayed after human rights groups said they would launch legal challenges. The policy had been due to start this month, despite criticism from opposition parties. Our correspondent Naweed Jabakil reports from Folkestone on Britain's south coast, the landing place for many seeking asylum.
Luscious greenery and sandy beaches. The coastline here is picturesque Britain. But these waters also have a darker side, the main route for migrants risking their lives to reach the UK. Last year alone, more than 28,000 people crossed the English Channel in small boats. Dozens of them died. The government says those who come illegally will soon be sent to and resettled in Rwanda. A dangerous move, say some on the front line here, dealing with arrivals.
It's immoral, it's a disgraceful idea. I don't actually think it's going to happen because I think it's going to be open to legal challenge, but the very fact that we're in a situation where people feel it's okay to suggest this is really disturbing.
And do you think there's public support for this, as the government claims?
I think there is a vocal minority of people who are opposed to migration, and they will support this. But as we've seen with the situation in Ukraine, there's lots of people displaced by conflict.
The UK will give Rwanda more than $150 million to fund the scheme, promising jobs, housing and healthcare for migrants. It says it'll stop the risky trade in people smuggling, but the move's been widely criticised and condemned, the UN calling it unacceptable.
Although the weather's getting warmer, the water here on the south coast of the UK is still pretty cold. Just 50 miles in that direction is France, where thousands of migrants are still hoping to reach these shores, undeterred by the latest plans and determined to make the final parts of a journey that's so often laced with danger, both on land and at sea.
Hardy made the journey from France 6 years ago, aged 16. He's now set up a new life, but hasn't seen or heard from his family since leaving Afghanistan on a very tough journey to the UK.
I just saw women, I just saw kids, old people, families. Yeah, it was really hard. I've seen people crying, I've seen people hurt, and we had problems. We got beaten up in different countries by the police, by the people. We had like very hard time.
Watching events thousands of miles away, Hasib is coming to terms with the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan. With an economy crippling under sanctions, poverty and insecurity are driving many like him to flee.
I want to leave Afghanistan right now. I'm 25 years old. In 25 years in Europe, a person can achieve so much: buy a house, car, run a business. But in Afghanistan, life fades away. There's no security, no life chances, no peace right now to be able to use your abilities and energy to progress your life. In the UK, life is valued. Here it isn't.
Hasib says people he knows in Kabul are now selling their homes for less than 50% of their value in order to get money to leave. The thought of Central Africa, the last thing on their minds. If the UK's plans go ahead, reaching places like this could become a lot harder. But with conflict and instability still raging in parts of the world, many more will keep trying in search of a better life. Norwegia Barkill, CGTN, Folkestone.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the magic of air travel is back, but it takes longer. Why Finnair is celebrating despite increased journey times to avoid Russia.
It is now important that all of us in Europe act very swiftly.
Fines for the non-vaccinated will most likely be between $1,000 and $4,000.
The new Omicron variant circulating in southern Africa.
The financial markets have also reacted badly to the news.
Growing dissatisfaction with the way the Dutch government is handling the pandemic.
Cancelling the city's main public Christmas markets for the second year in a row.
Protests and riots by those opposed to restrictions and vaccinations.
There is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Ukraine accuses Russian forces of continuing firing as civilians trapped in the Azovstal steel plant try to leave along the humanitarian corridor.
Cutting off Russia's funding. Hungary says no to an oil embargo on Moscow as EU negotiators meet to win over reluctant countries.
Boris Johnson's Conservative Party gets a kicking in local elections, but there might be more political drama ahead in Northern Ireland.
Russia's defense ministry says it has destroyed a large ammunition depot in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk. The city's governor says up to 35 civilians were injured after a shell hit a residential area. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Will Denslow in Riga. Will, are we any clearer about what's happened in Kramatorsk?
Well, Robin, we certainly aren't, and it, of course, as you rightly mentioned, depends on where you're checking your news from. Of course, that message from Moscow is that they targeted a large ammunition depot. As far as a Ukrainian governor in that region is concerned, he said that this was a wide-ranging attack. You mentioned that around at least 35 people civilians injured. We also understand, according to the governor, that more than 800 apartment units were damaged across more than 30 high-rise apartment buildings. Also stating that 2 schools and 1 medical facility were damaged as well. When it comes to Kramatorsk, we've also understood, according to UK intelligence at least, that Russia is making advances to try and capture that particular area.
And will Russia stepping up bombardment is being seen as a wider push into eastern Ukraine ahead of Moscow's annual Victory Day?
That's absolutely right, Robin. Plenty of speculation as to whether Russia will declare any major military wins on May 9th. Of course, Victory Day, such a prominent date in the Russian calendar. We have heard from Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, about whether Russia will seek to declare victory in Mariupol on May 9th. He said that there will be a Victory Day celebration in Mariupol, but was tight-lipped on whether it will be on May 9th. There's been plenty of other speculation as to whether Russia will seek major gains in other parts of the country too. US officials are saying they have credible information that they believe that Russia is planning to annex Donetsk as well as Luhansk in the Donbass region as early as the middle of this month. US officials saying this will be right out of the Kremlin playbook. There's also speculation, Robin, as to whether Russia will seek to really describe this as a war on May 9th, really amplifying what is currently being described by the Kremlin as a special military operation. That again has been somewhat downplayed by the Kremlin, saying that's nonsense. Vladimir Putin, we're also getting some information from Reuters, a news agency, about what will exactly be entailed in these events on May 9th. We believe that the Doomsday plane will be flying overhead in Moscow, so perhaps a somewhat chilling reminder of the prospect of nuclear war.
Will, thanks very much. Our correspondent Will Denslow there in Riga.
Thousands of Sri Lankans have taken to the streets to demand the president and the government step down over the country's worst financial crisis in decades. Shops, schools and banks in the capital, Colombo, were closed as workers called for change. Sri Lanka has been hard hit by the pandemic and rising oil prices, leading to shortages of imported food, fuel and medicines.
At least 53 people have now been confirmed dead after a building in China collapsed last week. Officials are investigating the cause and several arrests have been made. It's thought the collapse was triggered by some residents making structural alterations inside the building.
Israeli police say they're searching for 2 Palestinians suspected of killing 3 people in an axe and knife attack Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas have both condemned the attack.
4 left-wing political parties in France have formed a coalition to run in June's parliamentary elections. The pact, which includes the Greens and the Communist Party, hopes to deprive newly re-elected President Emmanuel Macron of a majority.
US President Joe Biden has named Karine Jean-Pierre as his new spokesperson, the first time a black or openly gay person has held this role. She's been Biden's deputy press secretary. She takes over from Jen Psaki, who's stepping down at the end of next week. Shares in IAG, the parent company of British Airways and Iberia, have fallen by as much as 8% after the group posted heavy first-quarter losses. But the company says demand for flights is bouncing back and it expects to return to profitability later in the year. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak is at Madrid Airport. Rahul, better times ahead perhaps for IAG.
Hello there, Jamie. Yeah, they hope so. They certainly need it. It's been a nightmare few years for the company and for the airline industry as a whole because of the pandemic, of course, and the resulting restrictions placed on travel. Now, they were expecting a loss, but maybe not quite as big as the one that we saw, which is probably the reason why their share price went into a tailspin this morning. But as you say, the company say that better times are around the corner. That's because summer is nearly here, and that is traditionally the high season for travel. And IAG say they're confident that the demand is there from people who are desperate to start travelling abroad once again. Here's my report. There has been turbulence, but the outlook is brighter skies on the horizon. IAG, the company that owns British Airways, Iberia and Aer Lingus, amongst others, issued its first quarter results, and the loss was worse than analysts predicted, but recovery appears ahead. At the start of the year, the Omicron variant played havoc with airline staffing levels and consumer confidence. When combined with the low season lull, it meant the group's operating revenue was 65% of pre-pandemic levels. On the positive side, it's an increase from the previous quarter, with analysts now expecting a return to profit by the second quarter.
For example, in the UK, as soon as it was announced that travel restrictions were taken away, immediately bookings boomed, recovered to 82% of pre-pandemic levels globally, both inbound and outbound. And indeed, for the outbound, it was 106% of 2019. So that pent-up demand, as soon as the barriers are taken away, people are wanting to travel.
Now, consumer confidence is absolutely crucial for the airline business. IAG say they hope to see their passenger capacity grow to 85% of pre-pandemic levels during these summer months as holidaymakers look to travel abroad again after 2 years of uncertainty. Countries like Spain desperately need a strong summer. Tourism, their number one industry, has benefited hugely from an easing of COVID restrictions as it looks to finally return to normal.
España, por una serie de circunstancias, unos posiblemente piensan que es un país.
People are now choosing Spain for various reasons. It is considered a very safe country, not close to any conflict, and also because they like Spain. Some have not been able to travel for the last 2 years because of imposed travel restrictions. So, with regard to both foreign and domestic tourism, we are very positive.
New headwinds like global inflationary pressures and reduced spending power loom large and could still play a major role in consumer confidence, but for now, despite a rocky start, the outlook this year is on its way up. Well, so much does depend on the next few months, especially for a country like Spain that really needs tourism to get back to pre-pandemic levels as soon as possible. IAG say the desire to travel abroad is out there. We'll find out for certain very, very soon. Back to you.
We certainly will. Rahul Pathak at Madrid Airport. Thank you very much.
Well, the aviation sector may be starting to take off again after the pandemic, but some things never change, including delays and detours. The war in Ukraine and the closure of airspaces has led to some longer flights. Our business correspondent, Juliet Mann, has been speaking to the CEO of Finnair.
The magic of flying, that experience of freedom is coming back. The small things, no masks, the fact that you can get the champagne, glass of champagne in the business class or in the economy. People want to feel that sensation of travel, that sensation of flying, and we see the demand coming roaring back.
We've all got used to video calls. Last time we interviewed you, it was via Zoom or Skype. But you're seeing a return of business travel?
Yes, we are gradually. It is for sure that leisure travel is leading the comeback, but there are definitely more than signs of life in business travel as well. So when we look at our bookings, for example, we are currently at the mark of 60% of pre-pandemic levels in terms of business travel, but the number is increasing gradually. And I think that during the course of the summer, during the fall, we will have seen a lot of business travel to recover.
You have some major strategic challenges to deal with, though, don't you? Russian airspace, not being able to fly over that. How's that affecting your day-to-day?
We were coming out beautifully out of the pandemic. Demand was recovering, and now we are faced with basically two external shocks that are related to the war in Ukraine. One is the Russian airspace closure, and the other one is the very high cost of fuel.
High cost of fuel, more emissions if you are still able to fly to Asia, but the long way round. What impact is that having on the business?
We are certainly still flying to markets like Japan, to South Korea, to China, but the routings are something like 40% longer when we go around the Russian airspace. So we have been needing to cut back on our flying to Asia, and we have refocused our network. So we have pivoted to West. We have been increasing our capacity at the Atlantic, introducing new destinations in US. We have been also increasing in South Asia, introducing new destinations in markets like India, Mumbai being an example, and then certainly now seeing a good comeback of demand in Europe. We are refocusing the network. We are adapting to the reality of Russian airspace being closed, and we think that it will be for a prolonged period of time, and that means that we, as well as the passengers, will need to adjust.
And what about the pandemic? Continued outbreaks, potential further shutdowns in China and other places of the world. How's that affecting your Far East business?
Well, for the time being, our Far East business is being affected by the pandemic, especially in markets like China, but also the Russian airspace closure. But eventually, I think that the COVID curbs will be lifted in Asia. We are seeing signs of that as we speak. South Korea has been reopening travel. Japan has just announced that during the course of the summer they will be opening, and I would imagine that eventually China will decide of similar measures. So the Asia focus for Finnair is also for the long term, and we are not turning backs to Asia. Asia will always play a big role for us.
In the United States, Wall Street stocks have tumbled again despite better than expected jobs news. The likelihood of slower growth is troubling the markets. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Terrett in New York. John, yes. What's been the reaction to this jobs report?
Well, Robin, you know, it is a Friday and we have 2 days to think about this, but I think the best word is confusion. Everyone is really a bit confused, and we just need more data, and we're only getting it in drips and drabs. I mean, look, the April jobs report was strong, no doubt about it. 428,000 jobs put on, and the March figure revised, and the what they call the unemployment rate was at 3.6%, which is pretty sweet, really. It's good. But the problem is that, although that's all very much on target, it seems to fly in the face of everything else we're being told, which, as you know from my reporting all this week on our programme, is that there seems to be a really serious downturn coming, a really serious slowdown. And these job numbers don't reflect that. So everyone is all over the place in terms of what they believe is happening and what they believe is going to happen. One other figure of great interest to most of us here is what they call the average hourly earnings. Now, this is interesting. This gives you an insight into the kind of confusion I'm talking about. Average hourly earnings were up 5.5%. Well, that's good, because you need to take on people, as you know. You need to keep them happy. But the trouble is inflation is 8%, possibly 9, possibly 10, possibly even higher. And so they're still in the hole by several percent. And the other thing that is really confusing to everybody here is that in the month of April, 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs. Now, in April, we just put on basically 400, 500,000 jobs. So where are the other 4 million? Where have they gone? What are they doing? Have they taken early retirement? Are they just taking some time off? Are they taking government assistance for a couple of weeks? Are they starting their own businesses? Nobody really knows. And the Pew Research Organization, which is very respected around the world, says that this quitting of jobs is up 20% on where it was prior to the COVID-19 crisis. And then on top of that, we have 11 million jobs open in America at the moment. 10 to 11 million jobs are presently unfilled. So this is a real problem, and that's why you have the Dow up and down and up today. Presently, it's down about 200 points. The Nasdaq's down sharply as well, and so is the S&P 500. But they're likely to come in neutral, I think, on the week when we get to the close today. Guys?
So down slightly today, but we saw big falls on Thursday, didn't we? What triggered those?
Yes. Well, I'm blaming Andrew Bailey. People around the world go, who's Andrew Bailey? Well, he is the governor of the Bank of England and a person who, when he speaks, people listen. He said yesterday that the bank had to raise interest rates. It's really interesting because the bank got its independence from the Blair administration 25 years ago, this week pretty much. And they've just put the rates up in the UK for the 4th time in a row, which is unheard of, to around 1%, which is not really very high. But what Bailey said was he had to raise rates and it may not actually help. And what he's talking about is that this wage pressure, which we've got to employ people that we need, is pushing up wage inflation. There's other inflation coming in from the likes of the ongoing operation in Ukraine, which is pushing food prices up. Bring those together and you've got stagflation. And the markets here saw this, whatever he's saying in Britain, likely to translate to the US economy. And that's why the market was up so much on Wednesday and down so much, more than 1,000 points on Thursday. And finally, I'll leave you with this thought for the weekend. The administration probably likes all of this because it shows that the markets, it's a big visible sign that something is not wrong, and it will stop people from spending on that car or that extension or that holiday. So they'll never say it, but they're probably comfortable to see the markets down as much as they are. It's a bizarre world, Robin. It really is.
It certainly is. John, thank you very much. Our correspondent, John Terrett, there in New York.
Since 2019, the number of so-called unicorns, the name for privately held startup companies valued at over $1 billion, has risen by more than 75%. But are they the future of the tech sector or a bubble ready to burst? CGTN's Stephen Cole has been talking to the man who turned a $2 million investment in Skype into a $200 million return.
The unicorn status comes, it goes. Many companies have had it, have lost it, have never gotten it back. If you look at many of the ones that are currently in that unicorn list that you have, many will likely never ultimately be sold for anything near that or will likely not go public. And so, you also have a lot of disappointment that comes post that if you're not able to maintain that. Who remembers the losing team in any FA Cup final? Nobody, right? And so it's fine to celebrate, and I'm the biggest proponent of celebration. But celebrating milestones are key, as opposed to this particular one event as the single event that defines success. It doesn't, right? It's an element of what you're trying to do.
What sector do you think is best suited for unicorns, if there is one?
Yeah, well, I think the question is one of timing. When is the sector ready for disruption? And so a lot of the work that we do at our firm is taking out a crystal ball and saying, what's going to be hot or hip in 10 years. Right now, we think healthcare is one of the great areas where there's big opportunities to disrupt the existing system, right? Across Europe, we spend about 12% of our GDP on healthcare. In the U.S., it's 17%. Our population is not getting any younger. And so the only way we fundamentally change that is by applying technology to trying to solve some of these issues. And so I think where we're spending most of our time is in that entire healthcare area. How can software, how can the internet just make it easier, better, cheaper, right, for people, for consumers, but also for prescribers, governments, and things like that to operate. So that, for me, is one of the really, really great areas of opportunity.
And you can see more of that interview in the agenda with Stephen Cole this weekend here on CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the story of the formation of the universe. We've been to CERN in Switzerland to talk antimatter.
This week on Razor, making the cosmic dust that made our solar system here on Earth, and using the techniques of infrared astronomy to safeguard endangered animals.
The survival of the human species depends on the environment. Without the oceans, without the forests, without a good functioning ecosystem, we might survive, but it's not going to be as it is now.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. It turns out we have a problem with our understanding of the universe. Scientific principles tell us every particle that exists has a corresponding antiparticle, which means that matter has an oppositely charged mirror image called antimatter.
According to everything we know, there should be equal amounts of matter and antimatter in the universe, but there isn't. CGTN's Neil Cairns travelled to Europe's Physics Research Centre, CERN, where scientists are trying to understand why. So, what did he learn?
Very much how little I actually know. And it was quite shocking because as somebody who's been interested in this stuff all my life, to realise that I've only been skimming along the periphery and not really understanding it. For example, the equation we've got behind us that we all know about, E equal mc squared, tells us basically what happened at the beginning of time, at the Big Bang. There was a huge outburst of energy. It coalesced into matter, and it should have coalesced into equal amounts of matter and antimatter. But there's hardly any antimatter in the universe now. In fact, one of the few places you can find it at CERN is where we went, the antimatter factory. And they are there, which sounds so much like science fiction and look like science fiction, creating antimatter hydrogen and comparing how it reacts with the forces of nature, such as gravity, light, with real hydrogen, our hydrogen, and trying to find out why that antimatter that was formed, according to everything we know about the universe, why that antimatter isn't here in the universe today, except in tiny quantities where it's produced spontaneously in the universe in tiny quantities, and also at the antimatter factory in CERN. And I bought you a present, these mugs.
This is very touching.
Well, I thought I thought you'd be moved. These control, there it is up there on the board, they contain, rather, the standard model of the universe. And two of the things that are missing from that amazing equation, which, as you can see, fits onto the side of a coffee cup, two of the things that are missing are gravity, amazingly, and this idea, why is there not enough antimatter in the universe? And so all the scientists at CERN and the place I visited, the antimatter factory, are trying to solve that puzzle. But because there's so little antimatter in the universe, first you have to build some. And that's why they call it the antimatter factory. They make anti-hydrogen, and then they compare how it reacts to the normal properties of the universe to hydrogen. And so far, to a millionth of a billionth of a point of precision, they've found no difference. But if they were to find a difference, that would mean that this whole equation, this standard model of the universe, needed to be looked at again. And as one of the physicists said to me, it's time for me then to hang up my hard hat, because it's a very industrial, grunty place with enormous machines studying these tiny things that are so small it's beyond the imagination.
During the pandemic, large sections of the United States economy ground to a halt as people stayed at home during lockdowns. As coronavirus fundamentally changed working life, business turned to technology and robotics. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
At Northern California's Ramar Foods, workers carefully pick and place Filipino foods like these dumplings. Right next to them is My Pao, a robot for rent that works at twice the speed of humans. This is actually the first time the robot is testing out an attachment that can pick up 3 buns at once. With the help of artificial intelligence algorithms, it should be able to learn and perfect this new method by the end of the day.
Robotics as a service with Rios intelligent machines is actually competitive with a labor force. And naturally, it comes with a whole lot of other benefits. We can treat a robot a little bit differently. We would never ask our employees to say, okay, now double your pace. But the robot can do that, and it definitely won't complain.
In an economy filled with labor shortages, Casada currently has 10 job openings. So he says it's vital to make sure his employees feel their robot colleague enhances their work too.
Because at the end of the day, the easy part is choosing the robot and where it's going to go. And it's fun to train it and all, but that could all be for naught if the team that's going to be working around it isn't on board.
Robots are also increasingly becoming part of warehouse inspections and even art gallery tours. The telepresence robots are created at Omni Labs in Silicon Valley. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the company moved to a larger headquarters so it could triple its robot production. It even builds its own 3D printers to make its specialized parts.
When everybody else had to shut down their operations, we increased capacity. As our robot is being deployed in healthcare, in manufacturing, in retail, is that we learn a lot. And from these learnings, we were able to take it back and doing product development.
With OmniLab's telepresence robots, there's really no excuse not to make yourself present at work in some way. All you have to do is have a shared link. I use the arrow keys to take control of one of the robots, and then I click to wherever I want to look. Hey guys, how you doing? Ready for the interview?
Yeah. Hey, nice to see you.
And out of the pandemic came this, an autonomous UVC disinfecting robot that can kill more than 99% of the coronavirus when passing by.
Well, hospitals are always chronically understaffed. They don't have time. They're already so busy. They're so slammed. Now you're asking me to disinfect 100 rooms a day. Let's design the product that's best, where you just put it in the room, hit one button, and walk out. You don't need to push around a 300-pound machine.
Go says hospitals are buying their robots and cleaning companies renting them. Just one more example of how robots have become more affordable while also learning to be more effective partners with their human coworkers. Mark New, CGTN, San Jose, California.
Europe.cgtn.com has all of the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take.
A research team has set up the world's highest weather station near the summit of Mount Chomolungma, known in Europe as Mount Everest. The 350th anniversary of celebrated stationery maker Rong Baozhai has been marked with a series of events. The business is famed for its woodblock printing. Robots armed with UV lights, a dry fog generator and a plasma air purifier have been deployed to disinfect emergency COVID facilities in Shanghai. An ancient burial site has cast light on the lives of Tibetan people more than 2,000 years ago. Clothes and grain have been preserved in a cave alongside human and animal bones. Beijing this year became the first city to host both Winter and Summer Olympics. A new route has been opened to allow tourists to relive the events. The annual summer fishing ban has begun. First implemented in 1999, it is designed to protect the major seas surrounding China from over-exploitation.
All that and more at CGTN.com.
The headlines again. Ukraine accuses Russian forces of continuing firing as civilians trapped in the Azovstal steel plant try to leave along the humanitarian corridor.
Our other headlines, cutting off Russia's funding. Hungary says no to an oil embargo on Moscow as European negotiators meet to try to win over reluctant countries.
And the owner of British Airways reports an $800 million loss for the first quarter of the year. It says it's confident of circling back to a post-COVID profit.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday. Same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.